Hello friends, I, Dr. Sanket Charkha, take this opportunity to conduct this particular session on service operations management for you. I have completed my graduation and post-graduation in commerce. I have completed my Masters of Business Administration from Savitribai Phule Pune University, and I have almost 10 years of teaching as well as academic experience. I have completed my Masters of Philosophy and Doctors of Philosophy, that is PhD, from the Savitribai Phule Pune University. My specialization is into banking, finance, operations management, international business, and so on. I have also completed various certification courses with respect to ARPIT, SWAYAM, and various government agencies and organizations. Currently, I am working as an assistant professor at Savitribai Phule Pune University. I welcome you all for this particular module with respect to service operations management in respect of hospitality and operations. Now let's begin with our learning. In the first session or the module, we'll be understanding and dealing with the concepts of customer-centric service concept. The learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by the customer-centric service concept, what are the various or importance and activities that are being undertaken for the customer-centric service, and how these particular activities are being implemented and undertaken in the organization. Now let's begin with our learning. Initially, we'll understand what do we mean by the customer-centric service. Customer-centric service is sometimes also known as the client-centric, wherein in an organization, any activity that is being undertaken, it is always undertaken for conducting or satisfying the customer's need. Based on the demand that has been created for a certain product, the supply of such commodity or goods and services is being undertaken. And always the supply or the demand that has been there into the market is always focusing or is always centric towards the customer. And hence, this customer-centric perspective is also called as the client-centric perspectives. In the modern or the traditional era, the major differentiation is we are moving from the profit maximization to the wealth maximization, and the business at the focus to the customer at the focus. And hence, the client is always at the center point and the central level, wherein as per the need, want, and desire of an individual customer, the product is being designed and it is being served to him. And hence, the corporate strategy and culture of the business is also being designed as per the need and requirement of a certain customer, and the always pleasing experience is also being provided to the customer, which brings in the brand loyalty with the organization, and hence the customer is always at the center. Customer-centric firms put the customer at the heart of their philosophy, operations, or ideas. Hence, a firm which is always customer-centric or client-centric always put their customer at focus, that is at the heart center, and accordingly they design their philosophies, they design their operations, and they always design their ideas based on the requirement need of a certain customer, and accordingly those particular activities are being undertaken. Let's further understand what do we mean by the customer-centric concept. So the customer centricity concept requires that the customer is at the center of all choices, wherein when all the operational activities or when all the service delivery is being undertaken, those particular delivery is being focused at a level that our customers should get satisfied. The delivery of either maybe product, maybe a service or an experience that a customer want to take always aims to see that the customer becomes happy, he becomes loyal, and always advocacy is created in order to create a customer in a long-term relationship association. So for those particular consideration, the customer is always at the center, and accordingly, all the activities of the organization or a particular business or maybe related to the operations circulate or rotate around the customer, so as to see that the customer is quite happy and satisfied with the service that has been delivered to him. The customer centricity refers to an organizational capacity to comprehend its customers. That is, what is the capacity of an organization to change their operational activities, to mold their respective employees, to see that whatever activities the organization are being performing, they are completely rotating and circulating around the customer. And hence, the customer's condition, the perceptions, and the expectations plays an important role. So, as per the demand that has been raised by a customer, so accordingly the products have been delivered to him, and it is always seen that he is satisfied and he is happy with the product. Now let's understand what are the various ways to provide the customer-centric services. Number one, that is operationalize the customer empathy. So here, in this case, one has to the organization, or that is one has to identify what is the empathy of the customer towards the operations. And accordingly, we need to operationalize our activities as per the need, want, and desire of an individual. So if a customer demands for a certain product or a certain process to be undertaken, then so accordingly, we need to change our operational activities, and accordingly, those particular changes in the product needs to be implemented. And hence, operationalization as per the demand of the customer is essentially required. Hire for customer orientation. Here, in this case, if for a concept of the customer orientation, what does the customer want or what does he need? For all those particular perspectives, we must hire an additional, or we must hire a excess amount of employees or a particular trainers who will approach our customers and get the information collected from them. And hence, for the customer orientation purpose, hiring of people in excess quantity or in extra quantity is essentially required, so that the proper care of the customers can be undertaken and a due information can be collected from them for the necessary changes or modification that needs to be done. The democratization of customer insights. Simultaneously, we always have to undertake and see that the democratization of customer insights is also into existence, wherein we always try to aim at whatever insight that have been given by the customer should be same and similar to all the people or all the operational activities. It should be of a certain concern or a situation that the activities that we are conducting, when the inputs have been collected from different customers, all those particular inputs should be applied in a very effective way, and it should bring in the results in the organization in a proper concern. So democratization of the customer insights is essentially important. The next perspective here at this stage is facilitating the direct interaction with the customers. So when at point number two, when we hire for customer orientation, it should always be seen that we need to facilitate the direct interaction with the customer. There should be no either a link or a sub mediator between a customer and the manufacturer or the dealer, and accordingly, direct information from the customer needs to be collected. When the first hand or the direct information from the customer is being collected, it does not percolate to different levels, and accordingly, the right or the correct information reaches the individual. So accordingly, we can continue the activity of point number one, that is operationalizing the customer empathy. And hence, in this way, for facilitating direct interaction with the customers, the point number two, that is hiring of customer orientation is required. And for hiring of when we hire customer orientation and when the information is been collected, we can in the sequence or in a particular way operationalize our customer empathy. Link employee culture to the customer outcomes. So in this case, we need to build in or we need to develop the employee culture or the internal environment of the organization as per the customer outcomes that are to be expected. And hence, as the customer needs or as the customer demands, so accordingly, our operational activities, our internal environment of the organization, everything should be modified, and accordingly, they must be linked with those particular activities. Tying the compensation to the customer. So whatever compensation, whatever reward or whatever output that has been generated, the additional profit that has been earned by the organization, everything should be tied with the customer. That is, what we receive from the customer is only from the benefit that the customer gets, the happiness, satisfaction, and the outcome that the customer is getting is ultimately the end resultant to the organization. And it is only when the customer becomes happy and he purchases our product or he gets a certain amount of service, and for those consideration he pays a certain amount of money to the organization, and hence any compensation that has been received, it should again back return in a forward concern to be tied with the customer satisfaction, and a delivery should be given to him with respect to the product that has been used or it has been served. Now let's understand what are the various benefits of customer centricity. Number one, it promotes the new value. So accordingly, the values in the organization are being created, they have been developed, and hence with this particular concern, promotion of new value is created in the organization. And hence, the customer centricity, if this particular policy is being adopted in a certain organization, it tries to create or it promotes the new value, creates the brand value for a business organization, and creates a long-term relationship. Increasing the customer value. So simultaneously, when the customer is at the center point, that is a client centricity approach has been accepted, then it increases the value of the customer also, because we provide certain importance and preference to the customer, and accordingly the value of the customer also increases simultaneously. So In return, when the business product are being sold, when the customer is always at the center point, the value proposition as to customer also increases, the brand value also, that is the product also increases, and the client value, that is the customer value, is also increasing simultaneously. Reducing the churning. So here in this case, reducing the churning means the number of series of activities that are being undertaken in an organization. So for those particular consideration, whatever activities that have been undertaken in the organization should be tried to reduce at a minimal level, and hence maximum or several number of activities which is of a repetitive nature should try to be controlled, and accordingly reducing of churning is essentially important or required. And hence, these are the various benefits which can be created or the organization can generate based on the customer being at the center point, that is the client-centric approach or the customer-centric approach. Now let's look into the various key elements of the customer centricity. The various key elements of customer centricity is number one, that is strong leadership. In an organization, to have a customer-centric approach, there should be strong leadership that has been generated. So when we have a leadership skills or a certain qualities, we always try to aim and focus at what are the various priorities that needs to be given and how all the customers can be taken together in a democratic way and how those particular ideas can be implemented so as to see that everyone gets benefited from the implementation. Establishing a customer-centric culture. So establishing a customer-centric culture within the organization and outside the organization is essentially required, which ultimately will aim and benefit both the ends, that is the organization as well as the customer. Vision and clarity. There should be a proper vision that has been there into existence, either with respect to the short-term objectives or the long-term objectives, and a clarified approach as to how to achieve that particular vision. That is increasing the customer base, increasing the customer satisfaction, building the brand loyalty, and so on. So for all those perspectives, the vision and clarity should be into existence, and accordingly, the initiated actions should be implemented in order to satisfy and fulfill those considerations. Engagement and collaborations. Certain engagements and collaboration with respect to the customer, a proper communication channel needs to be developed. Hiring of additional people needs to be there into existence so that the engagement and collaboration between the people increases simultaneously, and accordingly the customer centricity approach is being grown. So in this particular case, what happened? The customer relationship between the organization and the employees also gets created, and a certain bondage is being attached with the people. Listening and learning. This is the one of the management habit that one has to inculcate is a proper listening and learning from the customer. So when a communication with the customer is being established, one try to see that how do we listen to a certain customer, what are the points that he's been saying, or what are the suggestions that have been given by him, and what do we learn from the suggestions that have been given. So accordingly, we need to operationalize our activities, and those particular activities needs to be implemented in our day-to-day processes. And hence, listening effectively and patiently from the customer and learning from those particular activities is essentially required. The next key element is alignment and action. So here in this case, a proper alignment of the positioning of these particular activities for the change in the operations, change in the activities, change in the internal environment is essentially required, and based on those particular consideration, the actions should be initiated. And hence, alignment of activities internally and externally to the organization with respect to the product and services that are needed to be delivered, with respect to the communication and information that needs to be imparted to the customers, to the people, to the employees, and so on. So that is the concept of alignment, and taking necessary steps to implement those particular actions is called the action orientation. And lastly, patience and commitment. There should be effective patience and commitment category or a prosperity with respect to how do we listen to a customer and what the values are being provided to him, and simultaneously the commitment as to what we are actually aiming to deliver to a certain consumer and within what specified duration the activity or task is being completed. And hence, for those particular consideration, a proper series of activities needs to be conducted within which tries to be aimed to be completed within a specified deadline. Now let's understand the further key elements of customer centricity. The key elements of customer centricity are the customer centricity itself, that is, the customer should be into a center point, that is a client-centric approach, wherein only then you can start with the consideration of the customer centricity. The next is the connection, that is how connect or in what way we have a connection with the customer, with the company, with the organization, with the market, with the forces of demand and supply, with the employees, and so on. The cognition. Cognition as to correlation and proper communication between the different participants or different channels. So, proper percolation or transfer of information at all levels should be undertaken, and then only we can come to a conclusion about what needs to be actually delivered. And lastly, the process of immersion. The immersion process is the initiation action or the concluding action that have been taken by the organization in order to see that how customer centricity approach can be implemented, wherein ultimately the customer gets benefited, he gets happy, and accordingly those particular objectives of the customer centricity are being fulfilled or they have been satisfied. Now let's understand what are the steps to driving a customer centricity culture. First thing, connecting with the customer. So initially, when we need to approach or whenever we need to implement a customer centric culture, we initially needs to get connected with our customer, and hence connecting with the customer is essentially important because it is the customers who will be able to provide certain information about what is good, what is bad, what are the various changes that have been expected, and how the product or service needs to be delivered. Curating the content. So whatever content that has been created, accordingly, we need to curate that particular content, and as per the listening power or as per the desires of a particular customer, the content must be delivered to him. And hence, the another step for driving a customer centric culture is developing our content which makes the customer appealing and which represents the organization in a better way. So developing and curating the content is essentially important. Engaging the various executives. So engaging of various executives who are experienced, who are soft spoken and concerned. So accordingly, those particular executives should be engaged, and accordingly, one should try to see that the customer centric culture is being implemented or is brought in into the organization, and they communicate with the customers in a very effective way. Enrolling the employees. So for when the customer number of customer base increases, so accordingly the number of employees in the organization, the enrollment of the employees should also increase simultaneously, which will ultimately deal with or understand about how many number of customers and the number of customers which have been allotted or applicable to the number of employees. And hence, for those particular consideration, enrollment of employees or increasing those number is essentially required. So, in summarization, we can understand that customer centricity aids in development of customer trust and loyalty, which ultimately brings in or develops the strong reputation for the organization. So, in order to build the value of a certain amount of goodwill for a company, always the customer should be at focus, and the activities that are being initiated in the organization should be rotating around or should be circulating around the customers, which ultimately focus to provide him the ultimate or the end happiness. Now, when customer centricity approach is being implemented, it raises the likelihood of favorable word of mouth communication and accordingly simultaneously reducing the customer employee friction. So, in order to decrease the friction between the employee and the customer, one should try to see that there is a proper exhibition or installation or the implementation of customer centricity approach, and accordingly a favorable word of mouth is being passed from one customer to another customer. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have learned what do we mean by the customer-centric service concept, what are the various activities that have been performed under the customer service-centric concept, and lastly, what are the benefits of customer-centric concepts in the organization. I hope you must have enjoyed your learning at this particular stage. Thank you so much for your patience listening. Thank you.